One of the big differences between mixing in a small home studio versus mixing in a larger venue is the size of the speaker system needed to power the room. Typically in larger rooms, subs are deployed to help handle the low end, but if you aren't used to mixing with subs, you might be confused with exactly how to incorporate them into your mix. It's tempting to think, I have subs, so I should probably route every input with low end into the subs. But is that really the best option? We're going to talk about that. In this video, I want to teach you the two main methods engineers use to integrate subs into their system, and then I'll explain the pros and cons associated with each method. And while I'm doing that, you can let me know in the comments if you have a specific way you like to run your subs and why you picked that method. All right, here we go. In the first method, the left-right signal is run from the output of the console into a hardware crossover. This is a unit that splits the signal into two different frequency bands. The first band is responsible for the low end, usually 80 to 100 hertz and below, and the second band is responsible for everything above that. The first band is then sent to the subs, and the second band is sent to the main speakers. With this setup, no information below the crossover point is sent to the main speakers, and no information above that is sent to the subs. In the second method, the left-right signal is run from the output of the console to the main speakers, and the subs are actually fed by a dedicated aux mix that's separate from the left-right feed. Typically, only channels with a lot of low-end information are put into this aux, such as a bass guitar or kick drum or sometimes low toms depending on the engineer. With this aux-fed setup, the speakers get the full range signal and the subs only get whatever channels you intentionally send to them. So these are the two main methods of feeding the subs. And of course, there are other ways to do it, but these are the two most common. So now comes the question, which method is the best for your situation? Well, there's a number of pros and cons that come with both solutions. So I'm going to go through those and then I'll make a recommendation for the setup that I tend to prefer. Let's review the crossover method first. The biggest pro of this method is that it really is kind of set and forget. Once the system engineer sets the system up, the mix engineer really doesn't have to do anything with it but mix. He doesn't have to worry about which channels are going to the subs and what their levels are. He really doesn't have to do any of that. He just focuses on mixing on the console. However, this is kind of a double-edged sword because the crossover does all the work for you. You have much less control over your low end. And with every input being sent to the subs, there's going to be a lot of unhelpful low end noise that is going to end up in the subs from open mics or even line-in instruments such as keyboards playing in a lower register or an acoustic guitar picking up stage noise through its sound hole or the pickups. And even if you're diligent about using high pass filters, you won't be able to catch everything. So, and the other big con actually comes into play if you use your board mix as a broadcast mix like many smaller churches do. Depending on exactly how you route it all, it can be very hard to know how much low end is going to end up in your broadcast. Because if you rely heavily on the subs in the room together with your mains and you mix with that perspective, then someone who's listening to the broadcast on their phone speakers is going to have a really different sonic experience that lacks a lot of the low end that you're experiencing with your subs in the room, if that makes sense. So this kind of plays into the pros of the aux-fed method. Feeding your subs with an aux gives you complete control over your low end, and you get to decide exactly which inputs reach the subs and which ones don't, creating a much cleaner mix. It also makes you less reliant on the subs for a great mix. A great exercise for anyone mixing in a live setting is to build as good of a mix as you can without the subs and then use the subs to supplement what's already coming out of the mains. So an example of this would be if you feel like your bass guitar is just lacking energy, it's just not punchy enough, try to use EQ on the input level to crank up that low end and adjust that balance in the frequency spectrum of the bass. And as soon as you get it sounding as good as you can, then dial up the subs to kind of supplement that for the room. In my opinion, your mix is going to be more cohesive and it'll really help your broadcast mix be as good as possible while also helping the room sound as good as possible at the same time. The main con of this approach really is that you have to be intentional with what you run to the subs. It isn't set and forget. Also, if you're not careful, you can be tempted to rely too heavily on boosting the overall level of your subs to get energy in the room instead of making sure the low end is really dialed in on your inputs first and then using the subs to supplement that, like I mentioned in the example just a minute ago. As you can probably tell at this point, the aux method is my personal preference when it comes to dealing with subs. I like having control over my low end, and I like setting up my mix to be as adaptable and versatile in as many different applications as I possibly can. But there's a lot of sound techs out there that prefer to run their subs completely differently than I do. So feel free to try out different setups, see which one gives you the best result, and let me know in the comments which method you prefer and why you prefer that. We can all learn from each other in that way. So hopefully this video was helpful for you. I always try to find topics I feel would be the most useful, especially for people starting out. So if that's you and you have other questions about this topic or others when it comes to mixing, you can actually contact me directly on my website, themixingprocess.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks for watching. I will see you on the next one.